everyone. I am Abby Romberger. I work at Redland High School in the West Shore School District. I like to spend my time being outside. So I enjoy hiking, kayaking. I do a lot of running, and I have recently gotten into baking. I am in the graduate program of assessment, curriculum, and teaching, specifically the STEM. And I also have two cats and one dog. I have Eleanor, Abe, and Lincoln. Hopefully, you kind of noticed the theme there. Um, I really don't feel like I have a lot of prior experience as an online learner. I've created and responded to discussion posts, but that's really kind of the extent of it. Minus, I've done some classes on Learner's Edge. I think it's a teaching channel now, where I was on my own, just responding to things and having one due date at the end. So I just don't feel like I really have had a whole lot of experience as an online learner. For my online teaching experience, I was definitely more of the web enhanced. I was not fully online, I wasn't really blended. And so I started doing more and more online, and then COVID hit, and I became obviously more online. Um, I was usually mostly play posit to get the material across to my students. When it first started, I was down in Frederick, Maryland, teaching, and so I wasn't. I guess I was fully online at that point, um, but we weren't really allowed to do a whole lot. And then I moved here into this new school, and we definitely first started fully online, held classes on Zoom, and then did a lot of things on Schoology and other different things. So now that we've transitioned face to face, and currently I am still doing mostly web enhanced online learning. I haven't done more than that. I'm not yet to that blended part or anything like that. So definitely still more that web enhanced learning that was mentioned in the article. Um, he mentions in the article some other skills that are in order that you need in order to teach online. And I feel like my content and subject area knowledge is solid. I'm in my 12th year of teaching. I've done Algebra 1 pretty much all 12 years. So that one's down. My AP pre-calc, maybe I could get a little bit more stronger knowledge in, but that's coming. But I do feel like my subject area and content are very well developed, and can support the online. The thing that I think I'm still going to need help getting that development on those online communication skills. Not that I can really work on my prior online experience, but I obviously can be taking some more online classes like I am, so I can get that experience there so I can improve there. As far as my online communication skills are going, right? So online teaching requires definitely an awareness of how one is communicating. And it makes sure that you're asking the right questions and all of the other stuff. And I just feel like my students, I can't, most of them have their cameras off if we're on Zoom on remote learning days and stuff like that. And I feel like I don't get that interaction, and it's a lot harder. Now, when we do have our Zoom days, I do feel like I'm getting that interaction through the chat that they don't necessarily give me in the classroom, which is nice. But I still feel like that online communication skill is something that I could absolutely use better of. Um, I also feel like I don't take advantage of the fact that my learning management system has the ability to give video and voice feedbacks to students. Teaching math, I never really thought of how I could do that. But now I'm like, that actually would be kind of nice to go in and say, hey, and mark up exactly, where I could have and give that immediate feedback. So I do feel like that's an area where I could get development on. Um, when I was reading these standards, I was like, man, this relates so much to a face to face as well. Yes, this could be. And so all through the reading, I was marking, hey, this is similar but different, and then this is completely different. And I didn't really find a whole lot that were super different, I felt like, between an online teaching and a face to face teaching. So, right, professional responsibilities. It's a quality that all teachers need. Whether that responsibility, right, that's where I think it's going to get different, is what is that professional responsibility. So I specifically mentioned A3 and A7 because I just felt like, okay, those were where we could really be a little different in those. So A3, right, continuously pursuing knowledge and skills related to online learning and pedagogy, right? we need to be, as teachers, making sure that we are staying up in the best practices. Um, However, what our best practices in our field could be different for that online teacher. Um, they need to be staying up with what's going on online and how all that is changing and doing that. So the content wise, everybody still needs to be getting on, but maybe that online is a little bit different. For A4, it says that the online teacher serves as an ambassador of knowledge to stakeholders, making sure that they're modeling the best practices in the online classroom and being an advocate for all teachers to practice reflection and add to their knowledge about online education, right? So for a face-to-face teacher, we 100% still need to be doing that reflection, and but do we really need to be adding to the knowledge of our online education like those online teachers? Honestly, I feel like you could argue one way or the other on this, because we do probably need to be keeping up with what's happening, what's going online. But if you're not fully online, maybe that looks different for us. And then that A7 mentions modeling digital citizenship. So, right, digital citizenship is a huge thing. It has its own category later on. And how I feel like an online teacher handles that is going to be different than how a face to face teacher handles it. It's still something that we need to have the conversation on, still something that we need to talk about. But again, I think it's a little bit different in that online versus face to face. So, standard B, right? It is super important that all teachers are supporting and facilitating potentially an online presence. And, as I'm saying this, I'm like, okay, well, maybe you're not online. So, and I'm fully thinking of me as like my math teacher, but maybe our, physical education teachers aren't having that online presence maybe. So maybe this is where it is going to be similar and different based off of really necessarily the content and not if you're an online teacher versus a face-to-face. I also feel that it would be different for face-to-face versus online because the online teacher probably it's a little bit higher necessity for that online teacher to make sure that they are having this standard and making sure that they are covering all of these things here. Community building. All right, I do feel like it would be almost a little more challenging to do in the online, but I still feel like you're seeing them in your face-to-face sessions as well. Like, right, we want to build that environment that students feel safe, also making sure that learning is happening, all of those things. How it looks in a face-to-face classroom versus online, I feel like that's where the difference is coming into play. But as a teacher, you still need to make sure that you are creating that environment. So, right, an online teacher, you're probably having different expectations. How you're actually getting the students to work together is probably a whole lot different than how it's happening in a face-to-face classroom. So the community building is still happening, but how it's getting done, I think, is differently. Learner engagement, and this is something that I actually mentioned later on as being what I think would be the hardest one to do online because, right, we need our learners engaged. This is something that is critical to all classrooms, online or face to face. How an online teacher builds relationships, and that's why I mentioned that being my hardest one. I feel like that would be very difficult, and I think I saw that whenever we were fully online. When I started at my new school in that 2020 to 2021 school year, I didn't get that same engagement. I didn't get those same relationships. And so, how the teachers are doing that and making sure that they're having their instruction in like a personalized path made to their goals with that feedback given, like as a face to face teacher, that would be extremely difficult to sit down and have a personalized plan for every single student and also making sure that you're giving that timely feedback. I would love to say that I do that on a daily basis, but I know that I'm not as good as that as I could be. And so I think online teachers, it needs to happen almost even more because, right, I get to see that student every single day. And so my feedback can be very quick and in person, whereas the feedback that is given online, I don't know. I just feel like you'd have to have different and be a lot more intentional and all those other things. So things that I mentioned being differently in that one would be D4 and D5. And so D4 being establishing relationships through timely and encouraging communication using various formats. And then D5 helping learners reach a content mastery through instruction, and quality feedback using various formats. I just feel like that would look different on the onto line. Digital systems I mentioned earlier. Once again, I do feel that all teachers need to encourage, you know, model and guide and encourage legal and ethical and safe behavior related to technology use. Like I mentioned earlier, maybe I was just thinking about this from my math standpoint and not as a teacher overall in a face-to-face. However, I think it's still important to even go over whether you're using the internet or not because of all of the different things that could happen online. I feel like nowadays, just going through that with the kids, I feel like would be an important thing. Maybe it's stressed more as an online, right? Because they're obviously online more. They're having more access to different things online, and so I just feel that very similar in a face-to-face and online. I just feel like online would be stressed more. Diverse instruction, right? Personalized learning is one of those things where it would be wonderful to have a very personalized plan for every single student in our class. I just feel like it's very difficult to do in a face-to-face environment. I also feel like we tend to sometimes move kids along when they're not ready. So again, I'm thinking in the math background of me, right? Because as a general, the class is ready, so do you move forward? Whereas online, they get to move at their own pace, potentially, depending on what their program looks like. So their path is truly personalized and created and implemented for them. And so this is where I mentioned having F6 and F7 being differently, because it is different, right? Being in a face-to-face classroom, those students are getting that instruction only, and maybe they're not all at that same pace, whereas if they're online, they are. So having that happen, as far as a teaching standpoint, right, we need to make sure that we are following all the rules, modifying when we need to modify, having the accommodations when we have the accommodations in place, making sure that we have alternative formats to course materials. All of those things we need to be doing as teachers anyway, no matter what content you're teaching. We need to make sure that we are following and meeting all of the needs of our students. So F6 and F7 is so the online teacher providing additional opportunities for personalized learner growth or enrichment. I just feel like we don't do this as well in a face-to-face. I feel like it's handled better on the online environment. And then in F7, the online teacher supports and provides a forum for sharing the varied talents and skills that learners bring to the online environment. I think right there, right, that's saying that the teacher is recognizing and supporting what skills the learner brings. And I just don't know if we see that necessarily in the face-to-face environment as much. And then we get to our assessments and measurements. And in the assessment measurements, obviously all teachers are going to be implementing assessments and using the data to make decisions for the students. Like all teachers should be doing that, right? Here's my assessment. I'm looking over the data. This is what my kids are going to do now. This went well, this went bad, etc. Right? We're having that reflection. What's going to be different between an online and a face-to-face here is truly going to be, how the assessments are being implemented, right? Face-to-face, maybe they're not online. Maybe they're paper and pencil. Maybe the assessment is just going to be a quick conversation between the students and the teacher, right? This can still happen on an online, but does it happen as much? Or does it depend on what program the student is in? So I also specifically mentioned G4 and G7 here. G4 being that the online teacher implements a variety of assessments that accurately measure learner proficiency. And I have this only on here because I do feel that some face-to-face classrooms and teachers is the same thing that they are using to assess, and we don't get necessarily a variety. I would hope that people are trying to get that variety, but maybe that's not always happening. I do feel it would be almost easier to have that variety of options during that online teaching. And then for G7, this one, sorry, got my papers mixed up, is that the online teacher customizes instruction to personalize a learning experience based on performance and assessment data and learner need. Online, depending on what program you're in, it's really easy to say, hey, this content didn't go well, let's reteach, let's go over this, go on and do this thing. Whereas maybe the another student that's in that same program, hey, you rocked it, you can keep going on, let's go, you're headed on to this particular topic, right? I feel like that's a lot easier and honestly well done on the online program and not necessarily in a face-to-face environment. And then we have our instructional design. And so in similarity, right, you're creating and incorporating lessons. I do feel a lot of teachers at my school are incorporating technology, which is why I had that under similarity. Maybe they're not. Maybe this would be a completely different thing, right? So maybe that face-to-face teacher is not doing any technology. Um, However, I do feel like it's similar. I do feel a lot of teachers are using that technology and incorporating that into their lessons. Um, it also mentioned understanding the alignment between assignments, assessments, and standard-based learning goals, which was H6. I feel like, right, that should be similar no matter what. Like every teacher should be doing that face to face or online. So I have that, and I even marked it in the similar because I feel like that was a huge one that really stood out. Like, yeah, this should be something that everybody is doing with that. Um, how the content is delivered, right? I really feel that that is going to be what's different here. How is your content getting across? And that does vary even from face to face, but I also feel like that's a huge difference in the face to face and online aspect of this. So, the hardest standards that I think would be to meeting as an online teacher. So, I said learner engagement, and that really just came from my history of when the pandemic had started and we were on Zoom and starting out the school year. It was difficult. I think now that I've been through it, the kids have been through it, I feel like it would go a lot better. But I do feel like that would be an area that would be super hard to meet. I think it was a difficult experience, and I just feel like in my mind that was one of the hardest things to get that student engagement with me. I also mentioned B3. So I have the fact that the online teacher uses different types of tools to interact in an online course in order to nurture learner relationships, encourage learner interactions, monitor, and motivate learner engagement. I like to do the same things. So I don't always like to go out and try different types all the time. I feel like it's something that I'm getting better at, but I'm also like, oh, well, this works. I want to keep using it. So I have that on there because of that different types. Like I just wonder, could I be doing better? And then the last one was establishing standards for learner behavior that was designed to ensure the academic integrity. Teaching math, I feel like this was a standard I picked to be hard because there are so many things out there right now that allow students to cheat. And so, that photo math, they unfortunately I think fall back on it, and I it's hard to overcome something that they've used for years before they get to you. So this is why I also mentioned this would be a hard standard because it's something that is a difficult thing to tell kids, hey, we need to learn from that. It could be a good tool, but they don't understand. Then they just do it not really to learn from, and just simply to do the work for them. So that would be, I feel like, a difficult thing to overcome. Still a challenge I feel like I see in my classroom. Um, so the last article that I read, it says, what challenge would you find to be what challenge would you find in being an online teacher? And honestly, it would be the time. I feel like I already don't have enough time as a face-to-face teacher. I couldn't imagine trying to do all of those things that we do, but throughout the day, right? So it mentions setting policies on responding time to emails, feedback on assignments, procedures for having questions answered, the role of the teacher facilitator. Like, your schedule is flexible. However, instead of answering, in my normal face to face classroom, I could have, five students maybe answering or asking questions while they're working on their homework. But I'm doing that in that, maybe 10 minutes that they have to work on their homework. Not Let me answer for 5 minutes for that kid, 5 minutes for this kid later on, right? That would be a whole lot more time that you're setting apart doing all those things. Giving feedback on assignments, giving feedback in person. That'd be great if you were able to do that online, right? Hey, can you quick Zoom with me? Can we go over this? But if you're just doing a video or just writing out the feedback, that's taking a lot more of your time. And while it's very important feedback, a lot of time, right? So I do feel like this would be a challenge that I think would be the hardest. So, she also mentions course content. I do feel like I'm good in my course content. So I don't necessarily think that would be a challenge. Maybe it would be a challenge if I'm told to use a very specific program and I'm not liking something about it. They mentioned how, you know, teachers are like wanting to fix something in the curriculum that they're using. So if I was creating the curriculum and it was all me, like, great, that'd be great. So maybe that would be a challenge if I'm using that course content that somebody else has created and I'm just implementing it. So it would be a challenge. I just don't think that would be the hardest challenge for me in what we have here. So I also found that she mentioned another focus area for development of online teachers is how the pedagogy is transformed as a result of being in an online setting, and the methods for engaging students, encouraging interaction, assisting students to be more self regulated, and helping them to stay on track are all parts of the art of online teaching that can be sometimes difficult to cultivate. And as I mentioned, I think that was a challenge for me to making sure that the students were engaged and staying on task and this and that. And so I do think that that comes also into the time part of it, having that time to build that relationship with the student and really facilitate an environment where they are engaged and actively learning and going from there. I also feel like the time comes into place, right? She mentions the ability to differentiate instruction is one of the key advantages of an online classroom, but without sufficient preparation and the capacity to create, revise, and guide the curriculum, then this opportunity is potentially lost. That would be great. I would love to sit down and truly sit down and look at all of my students and differentiate the instruction for them. Um, I think it's very difficult to implement the way I would like to in a face to face. I think it would be easier online, but it would take a lot of time, a lot of time. So that's why right as I kept reading through this article, I just kept thinking, okay, well, that would be time. This would be time, right? Dealing with student issues, that would be time. So I feel like it all went back to having enough time. And so that's why I feel like that would be a challenge for me. And I think that is it.